The space around the broken colony ship looked like a graveyard of metal and dreams. Pieces of hull floated in the darkness, spinning slowly under the light of distant stars. The ship that once carried 5,000 humans to their new home was now just scattered debris, telling the story of a journey that ended too soon. Dr. Kethver pressed his 4 hands against the observation window of the Zilarian research vessel Void Seeker. His large black eyes reflected the wreckage as he watched the salvage drones move through the field like mechanical vultures. Each drone collected samples with careful precision, gathering everything from twisted metal to frozen organic matter. "Another failed expansion attempt," he said to his assistant Valthara, who stood beside him with a datapad in her clawed hands. These humans never learned to properly test their technology before venturing so far from their homeworld. Valthara nodded, her blue-scaled head bobbing as she recorded his observations. The Zilarians had been studying various species for centuries, documenting their attempts to spread across the galaxy. Most failed spectacularly, just like this human colony ship. It was rare to find a species that could successfully adapt to the challenges of deep space exploration. The colony ship had been named New Hope, a typical human name that showed their tendency toward optimism despite their obvious limitations. According to the ship's logs, which their computers had easily decoded, the vessel suffered a catastrophic reactor failure while traveling to the Kepler 442 system. The explosion tore through the ship's main sections, killing everyone instantly, or leaving them to die slowly in the vacuum of space. Lisa Carter had been working in Section C when the explosion happened. She was 28 years old, a structural engineer responsible for maintaining the ship's support systems. When the reactor exploded, she had been checking the integrity of a support beam near the outer hull. The blast threw her through a breach in the wall, sending her spinning into space wearing only her emergency suit. The emergency suit was a basic model, designed to keep someone alive for maybe 30 minutes in vacuum. It had a small oxygen tank, basic heating elements, and a simple communication system. By human standards, it was decent emergency equipment. By Zilarian standards, it was primitive junk that barely qualified as protective gear. Lisa had been floating in space for 3 days when the Zilarian drones found her. Her suit's power had died hours after the accident, leaving her with no heat, no air circulation, and no way to call for help. The cold of space had frozen her solid, and her body temperature had dropped to match the surrounding void. The drones detected no life signs from her body. Their sensors, calibrated to recognize life in dozens of different species, found no heartbeat, no brain activity, no metabolic processes. To every instrument on the ship, Lisa Carter was just another corpse floating in the wreckage. "This specimen appears to be in excellent condition," Valthara reported as the drones brought Lisa's frozen form aboard. "The vacuum exposure has preserved the body perfectly. We should be able to conduct a complete analysis of human physiology." Dr. Kethver examined the readings on his screens. The human body was smaller than most species they studied, appearing fragile and poorly adapted for space travel. Her bones looked thin compared to Zilarian bone density, and her muscle mass was minimal. The skin seemed far too delicate to handle temperature variations or radiation exposure. "Transfer the specimen to Biolab 7, he ordered. "I want complete scans of the skeletal structure, nervous system, and internal organs. This should provide valuable data on why humans fail so consistently at space exploration." The biolab was a sterile white room filled with advanced medical equipment. Scanning devices hung from the ceiling like mechanical spiders, ready to examine any form of life from any angle. The walls were lined with specimen containers, each holding samples from dozens of different worlds and species. Lisa's body was placed on an examination table in the center of the room. The scanners immediately went to work, sending invisible beams through her frozen form to map every cell and molecule. The data flowed to screens around the room, building a complete picture of human anatomy for the Zilarian scientists to study. "Fascinating," Dr. Kethver muttered as he reviewed the initial results. "Their cardiovascular system is remarkably inefficient compared to most species. A single heart pumping through a simple network of blood vessels. No backup systems, no redundancy. One major injury could easily be fatal. Velthara pointed to another screen showing Lisa's brain structure. The neural pathways are surprisingly complex for such a primitive species. They seem to have developed advanced cognitive abilities despite their physical limitations. Perhaps they compensate for weakness with intelligence. The Zilarians spent hours documenting every aspect of Lisa's body, then measured bone density, analyzed tissue samples, and mapped her nervous system with scientific precision. To them, she was just another specimen, no different from the countless other creatures they had studied over the years. Her emergency suit was removed and placed in storage for later analysis. The Zilarians found the technology amusing in its simplicity. The oxygen recycling system was basic chemistry. The heating elements were just resistance wires, and the communication system used radio waves like something from a museum. "Look at this," Velthara said, holding up Lisa's identification badge. The plastic card contained her photo, name, and job title printed in simple English letters. Lisa Carter, structural engineer. She was responsible for maintaining the ship's framework. Quite ironic that she ended up floating in space when that framework failed. Dr. Kethver made notes in his research log, documenting everything they discovered about human physiology and technology. The data would be valuable for future encounters with the species, assuming humans survived long enough as a civilization to be worth studying again. "Their expansion into space appears premature," he recorded. "Physical limitations and primitive technology suggest they lack the capability for successful interstellar colonization. Recommend classification as low-threat species with minimal monitoring required." The examination continued through the ship's night cycle as the Void Seeker began its journey back toward Zilarian space. Lisa's body remained on the table, surrounded by humming machines and blinking lights. The scanners had found everything they needed to know about human anatomy. Or so the scientists believed. None of the Zilarian instruments detected the subtle changes beginning deep within Lisa's cells. Her body, pushed beyond all known limits of survival, was starting to adapt in ways that no species had ever demonstrated before. The extreme cold, the vacuum exposure, and the trauma of near death were triggering responses that even human science didn't understand. Her brain, though appearing inactive to alien scanners, was reorganizing itself at the molecular level. Her cardiovascular system was developing new pathways to improve efficiency. Her cellular structure was changing to better handle extreme environments, but the Zilarians saw none of this. Their instruments, designed to study normal biological functions, couldn't detect the unprecedented transformation taking place inside the woman they assumed was dead. They continued their research, completely unaware that their greatest discovery was happening right under their noses. The alarm started screaming at 0347 hours during the ship's quiet cycle. Dr. Kethver jerked awake in his quarters as red lights flashed across his walls. The emergency alert system was designed to wake the entire crew when something went seriously wrong, and right now it was telling everyone that something impossible was happening in Biolab 7. Velthara reached the lab first, her clawed feet clicking against the metal floor as she ran through the corridors. She burst through the door and stopped dead in her tracks. The examination table that had held Lisa Carter's frozen corpse was now occupied by a very much alive human woman, whose eyes were wide open and staring directly at her. Lisa's chest was rising and falling with steady breaths. Her skin had changed, from the pale blue of frozen death to a healthy pink color. Most shocking of all, she was sitting up on the table, her head turning to track Velthara's movements with clear intelligence in her eyes. "Impossible," Velthara whispered, her voice shaking as she backed against the wall. The scanners showed no life signs. She was dead for 3 days. Dr. Kethver arrived moments later, followed by 3 other research team members. They crowded in the doorway, afraid to enter the room but unable to look away from the miracle taking place before them. The human who had been clinically dead was now very much alive and apparently studying them with the same intensity. They had used to study her. Lisa took a deep breath and felt air fill her lungs for the first time in days. The sensation was strange, as if she had forgotten how to breathe and was remembering the process all over again. Her body felt different, stronger somehow, as if her time and space had changed her in fundamental ways. She looked around the sterile white room, taking in the alien technology and the frightened faces of her captors. Her engineering mind immediately began analyzing everything she saw, from the scanning equipment hanging from the ceiling to the control panels lining the walls. The technology was clearly advanced, but she could see patterns in the design that made sense to her logical thinking. "How is this possible?" Dr. Kethver asked, his voice filled with scientific wonder and growing fear. "No known species has ever survived vacuum exposure for more than a few minutes. She was in space for 72 hours without life support." Lisa tried to speak but found her throat dry and scratchy. She swallowed several times, working moisture back into her mouth. When she finally managed to make sounds, her voice was rough but clear. "Water," she said in English. Though she doubted they would understand her language, the Zilarians looked at each other in confusion. Their universal translators were designed to work with living beings, not with specimens they had assumed were dead. It took several minutes for the computer systems to analyze Lisa's speech patterns and begin providing translations. "She is requesting liquid for consumption," the ship's computer announced in the Zilarian language. "The specimen appears to be experiencing dehydration." Valthara hesitantly approached the table, carrying a container of water that was safe for most carbon-based life forms. She held it out to Lisa, who took it with steady hands and drank deeply. The liquid felt amazing going down her throat, and she could feel her body absorbing it with unusual efficiency. "Thank you," Lisa said, her voice already sounding stronger. The translator converted her words, and the Zilarians heard the phrase. In their own language, Dr. Kethver stepped closer, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. "What is your name, specimen?" "Lisa Carter," she replied, setting down the water container. "And I'm not a specimen. I'm a person." The distinction seemed lost on the aliens, who continued to stare at her as if she were some impossible puzzle they needed to solve. Lisa could see the fear in their large black eyes, mixed with fascination and confusion. They had clearly never encountered anything like her before. "You were dead," Dr. Kethver said, consulting his datapad. "Our sensors detected no life signs whatsoever. Your body temperature was below freezing, your heart had stopped, and your brain showed no activity. How are you alive?" Lisa considered the question. She remembered floating in space, remembered the cold seeping into her bones, remembered the moment when her emergency suit's power died and left her alone in the void. But she also remembered something else, something that felt like dreaming while awake. "I don't know," she admitted. "I remember being in space, but it felt like sleeping, like my body was waiting for something." The Zilarians exchanged worried glances. In all their years of studying different species, they had never encountered anything that could survive clinical death and return to life. Their medical knowledge, advanced as it was, had no explanation for what they were witnessing. Valthara checked the environmental controls for the biolab. "The atmosphere in here is not suitable for human life," she reported. "According to our data, humans require a specific mixture of oxygen and nitrogen to survive. This room contains only 30% of the oxygen levels found on their homeworld." Lisa looked around the room again, suddenly aware that she was breathing alien air. She should have been gasping for oxygen, struggling to stay conscious in the thin atmosphere. Instead, she felt fine, as if her lungs were working more efficiently than they ever had before. "I can breathe your air," she said, taking another deep breath to prove her point. "It tastes different, kind of metallic, but it's fine." Dr. Kethver made rapid notes on his datapad. "This is unprecedented. Her physiology appears to be adapting to our environment in real time. Her cellular structure must be changing to accommodate the different atmospheric conditions." Lisa stood up from the examination table, testing her balance. Her legs felt strong and steady, though she had expected them to be weak after days of being unconscious. Her muscles responded perfectly to her commands, and her coordination seemed better than it had ever been. "Where am I?" she asked, looking around the room. "What kind of ship is this?" "You are aboard the Zilarian research vessel." "Void Seeker," Dr. Kethver replied. "We found you floating in the debris of your colony ship. You were dead, so we brought you here for study." The casual way he said it made Lisa's blood run cold. They had taken her body for scientific research, treating her like a laboratory specimen instead of a person. She was alive now, but that didn't change the fact that they had kidnapped her corpse with the intention of dissecting it. "Study?" she repeated, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You mean you were going to cut me up and see how I worked?" "Standard procedure for unknown species," Valthara said, apparently not understanding why Lisa might be upset about this. "We need to understand biological structures and capabilities for our research." Lisa felt anger building inside her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was outnumbered and on an alien ship millions of miles from any human settlement. Getting angry wouldn't help her situation, but gathering information might. "How long was I dead?" she asked. 72 hours? Dr. Kethver replied. "We have been traveling toward our home system for 3 days since we collected your body. 3 days. Lisa had been dead for 3 days and had somehow come back to life on an alien research ship. The implications were staggering, and she could see that the Zilarians were just as confused as she was. She looked at the scanning equipment around the room and realized that these aliens had been studying her while she was unconscious. They knew things about her body that she didn't even know about herself. The thought made her feel violated and angry, but it also gave her an idea. "What did you learn about humans?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Dr. Kethver consulted his notes. "Your species appears to be poorly adapted for space travel. Fragile bone structure, inefficient cardiovascular system, minimal redundancy in vital organs. We classified humans as a low-threat species with limited expansion potential." Lisa almost smiled at that. If these aliens thought humans were weak and harmless, they were in for a very unpleasant surprise. She had always known that humans were tougher than they looked, but apparently she was tougher than even she had realized. "You might want to update that classification," she said quietly. Lisa spent the next 18 hours in what the Zilarians called a containment chamber. It was a transparent box made of some kind of energy field that kept her trapped, while allowing the aliens to observe her every movement. The chamber was barely large enough for her to stand and walk 3 steps in any direction, but it gave her a perfect view of the biolab and the aliens who kept studying her. Dr. Kethver and his team took turns watching her, making notes about everything she did. When she slept, they recorded her breathing patterns. When she exercised, they measured her muscle responses. When she ate the bland nutrition paste they provided, they analyzed her digestive processes. Lisa felt like an animal in a zoo, except the visitors were taking notes about how to better understand her species. She used the time to study them right back. Lisa had always been good at observing patterns and understanding how systems worked. And the Zilarian ship was just another system to figure out? She watched the aliens interact with their technology, noting how they operated the control panels, and how the various machines responded to their commands. The containment chamber itself was particularly interesting. Lisa could see the energy projectors that created the force field walls, and she noticed that they were connected to the main power grid through a series of conduits running along the ceiling. The system was designed to be foolproof, but Lisa had spent years working with complex engineering systems, and she knew that every system had weaknesses. During the ship's night cycle, when most of the crew was asleep, Lisa began her escape attempt. She had noticed that the containment field fluctuated slightly every few minutes, probably due to power management protocols that reduced energy consumption during low activity periods. The fluctuations were tiny, barely noticeable, but they created brief moments when the field was weaker. Lisa positioned herself at the corner of the chamber where 2 field walls met. She had observed that the energy projectors had to overlap their beams to create a solid barrier, and overlapping energy fields always created interference patterns. If she could time her actions perfectly with the power fluctuations, she might be able to create a feedback loop that would overload the system. she pressed her hands against the corner, where the fields intersected and began pushing in a specific rhythm. Each push was timed to coincide with the power fluctuations, creating tiny distortions in the energy pattern. The distortions were so small that the monitoring systems didn't register them as a threat, but Lisa knew that small problems could become big problems very quickly if they resonated at the right frequency. After 2 hours of careful work, the feedback loop reached critical mass. The energy projectors began to vibrate as the interference pattern grew stronger, and warning lights started flashing on the control panels. Lisa stepped back just as the containment field collapsed with a shower of sparks and a loud humming sound that quickly died away. The biolab's emergency systems activated immediately, but Lisa was already moving. She had spent hours planning her route through the ship, using her observations of the aliens' movements to map out the corridor system. The Zilarians were larger than humans, which meant their doorways and passages were bigger than she needed. But it also meant they had never considered that someone might use the maintenance tunnels and service corridors that were too small for them to enter. Lisa squeezed through a ventilation grate that led to the ship's environmental systems. The tunnels were cramped and dark, but her engineering background had prepared her for working in tight spaces. She crawled through the ship's infrastructure, following the main power conduits toward what she hoped was the central computer core behind her. Alarms were sounding throughout the ship as the crew discovered her escape. She could hear the aliens shouting to each other in their own language, coordinating search teams and sealing off sections of the ship. But they were looking for her in the main corridors and rooms, not in the narrow spaces between the walls where only a human could fit. The maintenance tunnels led her past the ship's main systems, and Lisa took the opportunity to study the alien technology up close. The power distribution system was more advanced than anything humans had developed, but the basic principles were the same. Electricity flowed through conduits, computer systems processed information through data networks, and life support systems recycled air and water using filtration and purification methods. She found the central computer core after 40 minutes of crawling through the ship's infrastructure. It was a massive room filled with processing units that hummed with electronic activity. The aliens had never considered that someone might access the core through the maintenance tunnels, so there were no security measures protecting the service. Entrance. Lisa emerged from the tunnels and found herself surrounded by the ship's most critical systems. The computers that controlled navigation, communications, life support, and weapons were all connected through a central network that she could access from several different terminals. Her engineering training had included basic computer programming, and she quickly figured out how to interface with the alien systems. The first thing she did was disable the internal security sensors in her immediate area. The ship's computer now had a blind spot that would hide her activities from the search teams. Next, she accessed the ship's database to learn more about her captors and their intentions. What she found made her blood run cold. The Zilarians weren't just researchers collecting specimens for scientific study. They were advanced scouts for a much larger military force, evaluating different species to determine which ones might pose threats to Zilarian expansion plans. Their files contained detailed reports on dozens of civilizations, with recommendations about which ones should be monitored, which ones should be contained, and which ones should be eliminated. Humanity had been classified as a manageable threat, based on their preliminary observations. The report recommended minimal monitoring with possible containment measures if humans expanded too quickly into Zilarian territory. But Lisa realized that her resurrection from clinical death would change that assessment dramatically. If the Zilarians learned that humans could survive impossible conditions and adapt to alien environments, they would reclassify her species. As a major threat, she began sabotaging the ship's systems, starting with the communications array. Lisa used her engineering knowledge to introduce subtle faults into the transmission systems that would prevent the ship from sending messages to the Zilarian fleet. The damage was designed to look like normal equipment failures rather than deliberate. Sabotage. Next, she targeted the navigation system, introducing errors into the star charts that would make it difficult for the ship to find its way back to Zilarian space. The changes were small enough that they wouldn't be noticed immediately, but they would accumulate over time until the ship was completely lost. The life support system was her third target. Lisa didn't want to kill the aliens, but she wanted to make sure they were too busy dealing with emergencies to focus on hunting her. She programmed the environmental controls to create random fluctuations in temperature and humidity throughout the ship, making the crew uncomfortable and forcing them to spend time fixing problems that didn't really exist. Finally, she accessed the ship's database and began copying everything she could find about Zilarian technology, military capabilities, and expansion plans. The information would be invaluable to human military planners if she could find a way to get it back to Earth. She stored the data on several portable storage devices she found in the computer. Captain Zorthakis' voice echoed through the ship's communication system as he coordinated the search efforts. The human specimen must be recaptured immediately. She represents a significant threat to our mission security. All crew members are to carry stun weapons and shoot on sight. Lisa smiled grimly as she listened to the announcement. The aliens were finally beginning to understand that they had made a serious mistake in underestimating humanity. She finished downloading the data and began looking for a way to get off the ship. The escape pod bay was heavily guarded, but Lisa had found something even better in the ship's database. The Zilarians had an emergency beacon system that could send distress signals across vast distances of space. The beacons were designed to be launched from the ship if it was in danger. Carrying information about the ship's location and status to any nearby vessels, Lisa modified one of the beacons to carry her stolen data instead of a distress signal. She programmed it to transmit everything she had learned about the Zilarians to any human ships or colonies it might encounter. Even if she didn't survive her escape attempt, the information would eventually reach someone who could use it. She launched the beacon from the computer core and watched it disappear into space through a small viewscreen. The beacon would travel for years if necessary, broadcasting its message to anyone who might be listening. The Zilarians would never know that their most sensitive military secrets were now floating through space, waiting to be discovered by the very species they had planned to eliminate. Now came the hard part. Lisa had to get to the escape pod bay and steal a ship, and she had to do it while the entire crew was looking for her. She crawled back into the maintenance tunnels and began making her way. Lisa crawled through the maintenance tunnels as the ship shook around her from the cascading system failures she had caused. Emergency lights cast strange shadows through the narrow passages, and she could hear the alien crew shouting orders and running through the corridors above her. The Zilarians were discovering just how much damage one determined human could cause when they put their mind to it. She reached the escape pod bay after 30 minutes of careful movement through the ship's infrastructure. The bay was a large room filled with small spacecraft designed for emergency evacuations, each pod capable of keeping a few crew members alive long enough to reach safety. Lisa studied the area through a ventilation grate, counting the guards and analyzing their patrol patterns. 6 Zilarian security officers stood watch over the escape pods, their weapons ready and their large black eyes scanning every shadow for signs of the escaped human. They had positioned themselves to cover all the main entrances to the bay, but they hadn't considered that someone might approach through the maintenance systems. Lisa waited until the guards were focused on a disturbance near the main entrance, then quietly removed the ventilation grate and dropped into the bay behind a row of escape pods. She moved silently between the small spacecraft, using her knowledge of the guards' positions to stay hidden while she examined the pods. Control systems. The escape pods were simpler than the main ship's technology, designed to be operated by anyone in emergency. Lisa found the basic controls easy to understand, and she quickly identified which pod would be best for her escape attempt. She chose one near the back of the bay that was partially hidden behind a support beam, giving her some protection from the guards. As she prepared to board the escape pod, Lisa noticed something that made her pause. One of the storage compartments in the bay was marked with symbols that her engineering mind recognized as warning signs. She had seen similar markings on dangerous materials throughout her career, and curiosity made her investigate despite the risk. Inside the compartment, she found weapons and equipment that the Zilarians had collected from other species they had encountered. There were energy rifles from a civilization called the Corvani, armor suits from the Dexian Empire, and data storage devices from dozens of different worlds. Each item was labeled with information about the species it came from and notes about their technological capabilities. Lisa realized she was looking at a collection of trophies from civilizations that the Zilarians had studied and apparently conquered. The weapons and equipment weren't just scientific specimens. They were proof that the aliens had been systematically destroying other intelligent species for years. She found a section dedicated to human artifacts, including items recovered from previous encounters with human ships and colonies. There were weapons, tools, and personal belongings that told the story of humans who had met the Zilarians before and hadn't survived to tell about it. The sight filled Lisa with cold anger as she understood the true scope of what she was dealing with. Among the human artifacts, she found something that changed everything. It was a data recorder from a human exploration ship called the Pioneer, and it contained a message that had been recorded just before the ship was destroyed. Lisa activated the device and listened to the final words of Captain Robert Hayes, a man she had never met but whose story would haunt her forever. "This is Captain Hayes of the exploration vessel Pioneer. We have encountered an alien species that calls themselves Zilarians. They appeared friendly at first, offering to share scientific knowledge and cultural information. We welcomed them aboard our ship and began what we thought were peaceful negotiations. We were wrong. They studied us, learned our weaknesses, and then attacked without warning. Our weapons were useless against their technology, and our defenses couldn't stop their assault. If anyone finds this recording, know that the Zilarians cannot be trusted. They see other species as specimens to be studied and then eliminated. Warn Earth, warn everyone. Don't let them do to others what they've done to us." The recording ended with the sounds of explosions and screams as the Pioneer was destroyed. Lisa sat in the dark storage compartment, holding the data recorder and feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just escaping from alien captors anymore. She was carrying the hopes and warnings of every human who had died at Zilarian hands. She copied the recording to her own storage devices, adding it to the collection of evidence she had gathered about Zilarian activities. The information would be crucial for preparing humanity for what was coming. Assuming she could find a way to get it back to human space, Lisa heard footsteps approaching the storage compartment and quickly closed the containers and moved back toward the escape pods. The guards were conducting a more thorough search of the bay, checking every possible hiding place for the escaped human. She had to move quickly if she wanted to get off the ship before they found her. She reached the escape pod she had selected and began the launch sequence, working as quietly as possible to avoid drawing attention. The pod systems came online with soft humming sounds, and she could feel the small spacecraft preparing for departure. All she needed was a few more minutes to complete the launch preparations. "There she is," one of the guards shouted in Zilarian, spotting Lisa through the pod's transparent canopy. The aliens raised their weapons and began firing energy bolts that sparked against the pod's hull. Lisa accelerated the launch sequence, bypassing safety protocols to get the pod moving as quickly as possible. The escape craft's engines ignited with a roar that echoed through the bay, and she felt herself pressed back into the pilot's seat as the pod shot out of the ship and into open space. Behind her, the Zilarian ship was a mess of flashing lights and system failures. Her sabotage had worked better than she had hoped, leaving the aliens struggling to deal with multiple emergencies while trying to pursue her escape pod. The ship's engines were stuttering as power distribution problems affected their propulsion systems, and their communications array was completely offline. Lisa set course for the nearest human colony, a mining settlement called New Terra that was 3 days away at maximum speed. The escape pod was designed for short-term survival, but she had enough air, water, and food to make the journey if she was careful with her resources. As she flew away from the Zilarian ship, Lisa activated the pod's communication system and began recording a message of her own. She told the story of her capture, her resurrection from clinical death, and her discovery of the Zilarian threat. She described their technology, their military capabilities, and their plans for dealing with humanity. "My name is Lisa Carter, and I was an engineer aboard the colony ship New Hope," she said into the recorder. "I died in space and came back to life on an alien research vessel. I've learned things about our enemies that humanity needs to know. The Zilarians have been studying us and they're planning something terrible, but they made one mistake. They underestimated what humans can do when we're pushed to our limits." She transmitted the message on all frequencies, hoping it would reach someone who could act on the information. The signal would spread through space, carrying her warning to any human ships or colonies that might be listening. Even if the Zilarians managed to stop her, the message would continue traveling through the void, alerting humanity to the danger. The escape pod sensors detected the Zilarian ship trying to follow her, but their damaged engines couldn't match her speed. Lisa watched their vessel grow smaller behind her, knowing that she had struck a blow against an enemy that had underestimated human determination and ingenuity. She spent the next few hours reviewing all the data she had stolen from the Zilarian ship, planning how to present the information to human authorities in a way that would convince them to take immediate action. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew that people would find it hard to believe that aliens had been secretly studying and eliminating human settlements for years. Lisa also thought about what had happened to her during those 3 days. When she was clinically dead, her body had adapted to survive in conditions that should have killed her, and she was now breathing alien air and functioning in ways that seemed impossible according to human medical knowledge. She wondered if other humans might have similar capabilities if they were pushed to the same extremes. The escape pod continued its journey toward New Terra, carrying with it the most important intelligence humanity had ever received about an alien threat. Lisa Carter, the engineer who had died and returned to life, was about to deliver a warning that would change the course of human history. She looked out at the stars ahead and smiled grimly. The Zilarians thought they knew everything about human capabilities, but they were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their refusal to give up, even when facing impossible odds. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and Lisa Carter intended to make sure her species was ready for it. Lisa's escape pod approached New Terra after 3 days of traveling through empty space. The mining colony appeared as a small cluster of lights against the darkness, looking fragile and vulnerable compared to the massive Zilarian warship she had escaped from. She could see the industrial platforms where workers extracted valuable minerals from asteroids, completely unaware that their entire species was under threat. The colony's communication officer, Jake Murphy, was the first person to receive Lisa's transmission. He had been expecting routine cargo manifests and maintenance reports, not a desperate warning about alien invaders. When Lisa's voice came through the speakers telling an impossible story about resurrection and alien threats, Jake almost dismissed. "It is some kind of elaborate hoax." "This is Lisa Carter broadcasting on emergency frequencies," her voice crackled through the static. "I need immediate contact with Colonial Defense Forces and Earth Command. Humanity is in extreme danger from an alien species called the Zilarians. They have been studying our colonies and planning our elimination. I have critical intelligence that must reach Earth immediately." Jake looked at his supervisor, Maria Santos, who had been running the communication center for 15 years. She had heard every kind of emergency call imaginable, from reactor failures to asteroid collisions, but nothing like this. The woman on the radio sounded desperate but rational, and her technical knowledge of communication protocols suggested she was telling the truth about being a human engineer. "Patch her through to Colony Administrator Chun," Maria ordered. "If she's lying, we'll figure it out quickly enough. If she's telling the truth, we can't afford to ignore her." Administrator Chun listened to Lisa's story with growing alarm. The evidence she presented was overwhelming, from detailed technical specifications of Zilarian technology to recordings of previous encounters with human ships. The data she had stolen from the alien vessel painted a picture of systematic genocide that had been going on for years without Earth's knowledge. "How do we know you're really human?" Chun asked during their conversation. "Your story about surviving in space for 3 days is impossible according to our medical knowledge." Lisa understood his skepticism. "Run a DNA scan when I dock," she replied. "Check my records from the New Hope colony ship. I can provide engineering specifications for human technology that only someone with my background would know. But more importantly, look at the evidence I'm transmitting. The Zilarian data files speak for themselves." While the colonial authorities debated whether to believe her story, Lisa was preparing for something much more important. She had spent the journey from the Zilarian ship planning a message that would change everything. And now she was ready to deliver it. She activated the escape pod's long-range communication array and began broadcasting on the same frequencies the Zilarians used for their military communications. Her message wasn't intended for human ears. It was meant for the alien fleet that was probably already on its way to eliminate the colonies. "This is Lisa Carter speaking to the Zilarian fleet," she said in clear, steady tones. "You thought I was dead. You thought my species was weak and primitive. You thought we would be easy to eliminate. You were wrong about everything." The message continued as Lisa's pod approached the docking bay of New Terra. "You made the mistake of underestimating humanity. You studied our technology and found it primitive. You examined our biology and found it fragile. You analyzed our military capabilities and found them limited. But you missed the most important thing about humans. We don't give up, we don't surrender. And we learn from our enemies." On the Zilarian homeworld, military commanders received Lisa's transmission with growing alarm. The human who had escaped from their research vessel was not only alive, she was actively challenging their entire assessment of her species. Emergency meetings were called as the leadership tried to understand how a single human had managed to penetrate their most advanced ship and steal classified military data. Admiral Kexthara, commander of the Zilarian invasion fleet, watched Lisa's message with 4 eyes that reflected both anger and fear. "How did one primitive specimen cause so much damage to our operation?" he demanded from his subordinates. "Our intelligence reports indicated humans were technologically inferior and strategically predictable. The human appears to have capabilities beyond our initial assessment," his tactical officer replied nervously. "She survived conditions that should have killed her, adapted to our environment, and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceeded our projections." Lisa's message continued broadcasting across Zilarian communication networks. "I've seen your files on other species you've destroyed. I know about the Corvani, the Vexians, and all the others. I've heard the final words of Captain Hayes from the Pioneer. You think you're superior because you have better weapons and more advanced technology? But you're about to learn that intelligence and determination matter more than firepower." The colonial defense forces at New Terra were scrambling to verify Lisa's claims while simultaneously preparing for a possible alien attack. Her stolen data included detailed information about Zilarian military tactics, weapon capabilities, and ship designs. If the information was accurate, humanity was facing an enemy far more dangerous than anything they had imagined. Lisa docked at New Terra and was immediately taken to a secure facility where military intelligence officers could debrief her. She spent hours describing everything she had experienced, from her resurrection aboard the alien ship to her discovery of their genocidal plans. Medical examinations confirmed that she was indeed human, though her physiology showed unusual adaptations that scientists couldn't explain. "Your cellular structure has changed in ways we've never seen before," Dr. Patricia Williams told her after completing the medical scans. "Your lung capacity has increased by 30%. Your muscle density is significantly higher than normal, and your nervous system is processing information at an accelerated rate. It's as if your body evolved decades of adaptation in just a few days." Lisa nodded, understanding that her transformation was probably connected to her exposure to extreme conditions and alien environments. "Whatever happened to me might be possible for other humans too," she said. If we're facing a war with the Zilarians, we need every advantage we can get. Her message to the alien fleet reached its conclusion as military planners on dozens of human worlds began receiving the intelligence she had gathered. You wanted to study humanity to understand our weaknesses. Instead, you've given us the greatest gift possible. You've shown us what we're capable of when we're pushed beyond our limits. You've taught us that we can survive anything and adapt to any environment. Most importantly, you've united us against a common enemy. The Zilarian invasion fleet was already en route to human space when Admiral Kexthara made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Abort the current mission," he ordered his fleet commanders. "Reclassify humans as an extreme threat. All ships are to return to base for reassessment and reinforcement." But it was too late. Lisa's stolen data had already reached Earth Command, and humanity was preparing for war with knowledge of Zilarian technology and tactics. Human engineers were reverse engineering alien weapon systems. Military strategists were developing countermeasures for Zilarian attack patterns. And scientists were studying Lisa's biological adaptations to understand how humans might evolve to meet the coming challenge. "You thought you could eliminate us quietly, one colony at a time," Lisa's message concluded. "Instead, you've awakened something that you can't control. Humanity is coming for you, and we're bringing everything we've learned from studying your mistakes. We know your weaknesses now, and we know how to exploit them." The hunters have become the hunted. Years later, when the Zilarian invasion fleet finally arrived at human space, they found not the primitive civilization they expected, but a species that had been preparing for war. Humans had used Zilarian technology to advance their own capabilities, develop new weapons based on alien designs, and train for combat scenarios that the invaders thought impossible. The first battle took place near the Jupiter mining stations, where human defenders used tactics derived from Lisa's intelligence to outmaneuver the supposedly superior alien forces. The Zilarians discovered that humans fought with a creativity and desperation that their logical minds couldn't predict or counter. Lisa Carter, now known throughout human space as the Awakened, served as a special advisor to the military command. Her unique understanding of Zilarian psychology and technology made her invaluable in planning defensive strategies. More importantly, her example had inspired other humans to push beyond their perceived limitations, leading to a new generation of adapted humans who could survive in environments that had once been considered impossible. The war lasted for 3 years, with battles fought across dozens of star systems. In the end, humanity's refusal to surrender and their ability to adapt to impossible conditions proved more powerful than Zilarian technology and numerical superiority. The aliens, who had dominated the galaxy for centuries, found themselves retreating from a species they had once dismissed as harmless primitives. Lisa's final message to the defeated Zilarian fleet was simple and direct.